Welcome, listeners. So today we're going to ask, what does mining, artificial intelligence, psychology, and Lego have in common? Vannessa Van Beek is Fortescue's global CISO and one of the most unique voices in cyber leadership. Vannessa holds an MBA in postgrad in psychology. She's also one of the few CISOs certified in Lego Series Play. In 2024, she won the Cybersecurity Champion Award at the Australian Women in Security Awards. Vannessa believes that crises are inevitable, but disciplined preparation, fast response, and continuous learning is our best defence. So today we're going to talk about Vannessa's journey into cyber, Fortescue's big moves in AI and automation, and how understanding how the brain learns is shaping the future of leadership. So thank you so much for joining us, Vannessa. Thank you as always for joining me, Jason. So over to you, Jason, for our first question.
Thanks, Tom. Great intro there, mate. Nailed it. It's,
Yeah.
yeah, we always love the intros. The Lego's good. There's always Lego. I was just at an event in Sydney yesterday, and there's always Lego on display for someone to win. So I like to jump into that one. Usually, Tom and I usually like to use super glue once we've got it together, just so it doesn't ever come apart again. And we can talk about stepping on bricks and how that relates to cybersecurity as well. But for the listeners, like, Tom and I know a fair bit about you, and I've probably studied you more in depth than anyone, especially when you put in the application for that award. But it's just for the listeners, we'd just like to find out, where you are now, how you got there, because it's an interesting story. And your son also a magnificent singer. There's so much stuff where there's so many pathways we could go down with this one too. So yeah, I've been looking forward to this episode, and give us the background, give us the story. Tom and I are really interested, and I'm sure the listeners will be as well.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Jason, and thanks, Tom, for the really warm welcome and great intro. So I find myself in this role at the moment, CISO for Fortescue. It's a global role. It's really exciting, and the path to get here was a really interesting path. I worked for about 2 decades in Telstra in infrastructure and data and transformation, and that was a really great background. And at one point of my career, I thought, gosh, I really want to move out of this kind of field, and I wasn't sure, which direction to go. And I just managed Telstra through a number of major events. We had the bushfires, floods, and then COVID. And each of those events is like a major incident in its own right in terms of the kind of communications, the pivoting of networks, the changes that needed to take place across government and enterprise. And I was looking after 3 states: West Australia, South Australia, and Northern Territory. So a fairly big patch at Telstra. And out of the blue, someone approached me and said, "Oh, look, we've read your profile, and we need a leader to lead our security operations capability." And I didn't know a lot about cyber. I did know a lot about people. I also knew a lot about leading a strategy, and I had pretty good foundational kind of understanding of networks and troubleshooting, and I was pretty calm under pressure. So I said, "Yeah, let's explore that role." So I started at Kinetic IT in their security operations capability, looking after about 20 Australian customers. And over time, we replaced our major platform technology. We expanded capabilities, and was also managing the platform and architecture team and the consulting team as well. And that was a really great
That's a good business
learning
too, isn't it? That
curve.
one? That's a massive business. Yeah, I remember that's where we sort of first met, because I think it was through Tony Campbell. Like, we've been doing some work with, and I
Yeah.
remember that's where we sort of first crossed paths at that point. But impressive business over there, and it's you learn a lot, in that environment. But the Telstra background must have given you some really good grounding for getting in there.
Yeah. So and that was awesome experience. And then I was approached to join Avanade, which is a Microsoft Accenture organisation, to lead their national security capability, to really build out their consulting practices. And they had a number of capabilities across modern identity, cyber defence, and secure cloud. So I worked with the team to build our capability, and really started diving into some of the new capability that Microsoft was developing, particularly around AI for security operations environments. Having worked in that field and done a lot of the work with teams manually and mapping processes, I was very keen to see what the application for AI would be, to streamline and help us respond to attacks faster. And like we see that in all the threat landscape, we see the speed and the velocity of attacks powered by AI and the cybercrime economy. So I just dived all in. Avanade was doing a big global trial of, I had early access to new tech. So I jumped in, got used to the tool, jumped into some user groups to really test the tool and look at some of the use cases for threat hunting, for incident management and malicious code analysis. And that was amazing. So we developed an MVP that we then, worked with a number of customers to implement and trial and do some testing. And we would test at the beginning of the process and at the end of the process. And, at the beginning it was about 3 hours for manual incident response. And at the end, it was getting down to half an hour. And if we could really get the right bit of logic apps and automation at the end, we could get it down to 10 and sub 10 minutes processing an incident, which was amazing. And it was my interest in the cross section between AI and cybersecurity and some of the leadership work that I was approached to have a look at the role at Fortescue. And so I've dived all in to this new role. So my first set of board reporting last week, and that went really well. So that was good. And some of the strategies that I'm leading that really excite me are those at the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. And in each of the roles that I've done, I've led large teams, and so been very keen to use the Lego serious play in informing teams and solving problems and running a bunch of experiments.
That's excellent. Yeah, I think that's and this is where Tom and I really excited. It's this obviously the cybersecurity, the AI component of it, and how that interplays. We're starting a fund in the next few weeks, hopefully, which is $100 million fund, or probably hopefully we'll be able to get more, but it will be for the next lot of cyber AI and quantum businesses, that will produce here for that sovereign capability. So we're forming a roundtable of CISO. So I'll probably we could talk about that offline, but we've got a few interested parties already, and we'll sit around there to create these products that we can get in market as quick as possible. So, yeah, your feedback on that would be great. But yeah, we can talk about that offline. No pressure on a podcast, at all. It's not like you got anything on your plate at the moment, but yeah, we're really excited about this and got some VC backing and stuff to get these projects up and running. But yeah, it's just we need to do more on it, don't we? Yes, because it's such a big thing, and AI is going so fast. We need to try where we can in cyber, try and stay ahead of it as much as we can. But it seems to be innovating at such a rapid pace. I just saw all the Google announcements, that came out late last week, and was sort of Tom and I were sort of looking all over that over the weekend, and we're trying to keep our finger on the pulse for it, but it's just moving at such a rapid rate. How are you finding that, like from Fortescue? I mean, as you said, global role, massive company. And when we look at each different jurisdiction, there's different applications and rules, etc., around AI. How have you sort of faced that? And I mean, what you can share of the board report, just at a high level, all the bits you can. What are you sort of looking at from your corner of the globe at the moment?
Yeah. So before I began, Fortescue was starting to work with AI. They developed their strategy. They had put in place responsible AI frameworks, and they had started to select use cases for AI. And they'd experimented with a number of, licensed AI models, and then they decided to go all in and build their own model. So they've built their own model called FGen, and they're now putting a lot of data into that model, testing it, and actually engaging different parts of the business to use AI at scale through a lot of the mining part of the organisation. And it's unlocking some really great.
The mining part. Because mining, are you thinking AI would be? There's so many manual processes and so many people-heavy jobs and things that can get missed in mining. That's that would be an exciting capability. I was imagining for mining, as you say.
We're using it in our supply chain, in our extraction process, right through to delivery and point of sale. We're using it to really work very closely with our scheduling capabilities and also to update rail planning. We're using the technology to automate a lot of activities that we would consider mundane activities, but also to accelerate decision making, allowing people to work, across tasks more efficiently.
Because you think geo as well, wouldn't you? Like geologists, like looking at all the maps and everything like that. What AI could actually pick up that would take a geologist ages to do, AI could do in a matter of seconds or minutes.
Yeah, and you may be aware that in a lot of mining technology, a lot of it's now autonomous. So on the back of the work that's already been done in Fortescue's Hive around all of that autonomous control systems, AI has now a place to play to further accelerate making decisions, scheduling, and as Fortescue's moving more to technology that's green, we need to be really mindful of things like weather patterns, because if you're running technology on the back of solar and battery and electrical, knowing weather patterns becomes really important, because you can make decisions to invest in a particular area on a particular day based on the energy you have available, and then following days you can schedule maintenance and all of those sorts of things. So really understanding and using it for that decision making, is to kind of do some of the predictive analysis, but more clearly in the planning and rollout of things.
Yeah, because the environment's a big thing, isn't it? Because there was that talk recently by Microsoft, and we think about AI, but it's the power and the amount of power we're going to need to actually, get this going. And then from a mining point of view, as you say, knowing weather patterns or knowing what you can do and the environmental impacts, AI can really help with that, which is something that's been put on the miners a lot. So if they can use that technology to help with keeping it as green as possible, that's obviously a massive thing too. So yeah, that's exciting to hear.
Mining is been an earlier adopter, as you say, of automation. The big trucks and all that kind of stuff are now driven. I've seen a lot of stuff about people remoting in to drive mining equipment and at scale and stuff like that. So with those jobs kind of changing, do you see this kind of industry as a leading adopter of having kind of end-to-end AI across supply chain and right throughout the business? Because a lot of organizations are just using it in specific areas at the moment. And maybe kind of paint a picture of what it's going to look like in 12 or 24 months.
Yeah. So when you think about where technology is today, so we have our operations which run 24/7, and they run from Perth, which supports an operation in the Pilbara, and that's already autonomous. And so to further enable all of those systems with greater intelligence for decision making, all of that data is now being used to guide the decisions that are being made. So we depend on some of this new technology to actually get a competitive edge, to achieve cost savings. So I think once the work has been done around the underlying technology and infrastructure, and then you've empowered that with autonomous technology, you can then, AI is this overlay that can then sit on top of it. But you've actually got to do a lot of work in the foundational, data governance, securing the data, all of those sorts of things. And then you basically map the processes, look at the data sources that you need, and then do the work of tuning those kinds of environments, accessing the right data at the right time. So it's quite an exciting project to be part of.
Yeah. What do you think it's really changing the role as a CISO? There's a global CISO that's coming in. You've got an organisation that's really mass adopting it right across. How is it kind of changing your role?
It's really interesting because this organisation has quite a high risk-reward appetite. So the role of a CISO is to understand the strategies of the organisation, the appetite the organisation has for growth and for risk, and then to map in with just the right amount of security to allow the right level of acceleration. So at the moment, we've got lots of different types of AI used across the organisation. The shadow AI is kind of mushrooming through the organisation, and I have quite good visibility of who's using AI and what they're using it for. And we're now starting to use some technology to actually put risk scores against all of the different AI applications that are being used and make recommendations that instead of using this one, we might consider this one because of issues related to data storage, privacy, and all of those sorts of things. But one of the things I'm also looking at is a solution that will actually allow me to get visibility and then apply runtime controls to protect for privacy, to protect for data, protect data from being exfiltrated, and also then to keep a watch on the model around bias and toxicity and some of the input and output coming out of those models. So I think the exciting thing is that you understand what the business needs, and then you work with the industry and the market to say, right, this is the problem we're facing. Who's new in the market with tech that will help us do what we need to do? So we'll start some trials and proof of concepts of some new tech in the next 2 weeks to really help us accelerate even further, applying guardrails as we need to get the right level of visibility to advise the organisation on where risk sits and how to treat that.
Sounds like a lot of digital twinning there.
Yeah.
Let's shift a little bit into one of my favourite things I've seen you talk about before, and we can touch on the Lego series play there. But psychology, neuroplasticity. I remember really enjoying a talk you did at one of the CISO conferences around taking learning into different environments, going for a walk, refreshing your brain, all this kind of stuff, which is something that's really getting talked about a lot, but it's still not a behaviour people are really embracing. And I saw you did a post, I think it was last week, about taking a team through a Lego series play event. So tell us a little bit about how that all kind of interplays and some of the kind of tips and lessons that you like to share around kind of building that mental plasticity and robustness in to kind of help people in this challenging cyber environment kind of deal with burnout and helping them with focus.
Yeah. So a lot of the work I do is technical, but the real work is with people. And as I've moved through my career, I've realised that the greatest challenge is actually harnessing the brilliance of people to solve problems. And coming into cyber, I discovered cyber people are different. Many of them are deep thinkers, many of them introverted, quite analytical. A lot of them do prefer to work alone, but the work requires us to collaborate. And so I needed to approach kind of how do I get the best out of this group that largely would prefer to work independently and in a dimly lit room, and if they were allowed to work from home, they probably would. And how do I get them to kind of share what they're working on, share some of their insights in a way that it has that sense of psychological safety? And how post-COVID do we reconnect individuals and teams back to the work and work in a way that's providing that really meaningful connection that I think we all are searching for? So I kind of stumbled across Lego Serious Play. I didn't have a big budget for team building, and the team was the sort of team that I wasn't sure that the traditional kind of team building activities would really work well with. But I had 20 kilos of Lego because I've raised 2 kids and they're in their 20s, and I've kept that asset, and I thought, I'm just going to take it to work. And I started doing some searching, and I found an open source Lego Serious Play methodology online. And I read the approach, and I took it to work, and I said, let's sit down and let's experiment with this open source methodology I found. And we started a facilitated process of building and sharing, and the very process of taking turns and sharing encouraged people to listen, and built that sense of everyone will get a turn. It sort of democratized the meeting, because before that, the meeting is for the people with ideas, and often the loudest voices get heard. But sometimes in cyber, you have to pause long enough to listen to the quiet voices, the analytical minds, and often we'll cut a meeting before we've actually heard from those people, because they're kind of processing in meetings. So yeah, I took my Lego box in and we built some models and we started exploring some ideas. And I just realized that when I did that, I was unlocking ideas that we weren't getting in traditional meetings. So then I decided I would learn a little bit more about the methodology and got a certification. And then I would actually use it more and more with my team to understand and problem solve, to look at threat models, but also to build up stronger communication between the team. One of my favourite activities is actually to get the team to talk about flow, what it feels like to be in the work, in flow. And you get people who build slides, or they'll build wheels, or they'll put cogs together, or they'll get powered boats and have that feeling of flow, or they'll make a push bike, and then I get them to describe what that feeling feels like when they're in the work. And then I flip it and ask them what it feels like when they're not in flow. And then I hear about what people actually need in the workplace, that they might be getting too many interruptions, they're attending too many meetings. If we attend more than 3 meetings a day, we kind of fall into a really counterproductive, our brain can't deal with too many meetings in a day. So even simple things like simplifying the calendar for people, clearing space for them to do deep work, and then giving them the freedom to work in a way that they need to. When people are in flow, it looks quite introverted. They've got headphones on. They're very quiet. They're tapping away at a computer. So then working out how we're going to have checkpoints so that we realise what everyone's working on and how we're going to share some of that. So we just then decided that we would actually put in place regular checkpoints first thing, but we would allow people to block time to get quite serious pieces of work done. And all of those insights were just, through reading and experimenting and just getting really close to people and understanding what they need.
How do you kind of help them with the flow state? It's interesting. It's something, I learned in martial arts, and then, mountain biking, it's one of those things, and you're flying down a hill, you can't think fast enough to actually go, there's a bump, there's a jump, you kind of have to just let go. And that's where I kind of learned how you enter that flow state. I mean, for me,
Is that when you let go of the handlebars as you were flying off the bike?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting actually, because a few of the bad accidents I've had have been when I've been thinking about work stuff and not lost in the moment. But often I'll put music on and I can disappear. And if I don't put an alarm on to remind me about a meeting or when I'm coming out, I can just kind of lose myself in it too. So how do you kind of help people get into that flow state, and then how do you kind of make it productive so it isn't just kind of like some lost time, so to speak?
Yeah, and this is the thing, right? Because work doesn't always happen at work. Some breakthrough thinking actually will happen on your walk to work. It can happen while you're washing the dishes or watering plants, and so the more I've come to understand the brain and what the brain needs, the less I get worried about how people are working, but the more I focus on what they need, and then doing more of that. And I agree with you. I do a bit of skateboarding myself, and one thing about skateboarding is you've got to be in your body. You've got to be in the moment. And I've had a couple of croppers where I've actually been thinking about other stuff other than the next turn or what I'm going to do. And when work kind of spills into that, it can really upset that kind of that balance and flow. So, but I think for every person it's different, and this is the remarkable thing about being human, right? There's no one way to do this. but I think it's a conversation. I think it's an exploration. But I think there is things that we can learn from other fields, like neuroscience, and applying that to ways of working, and actually opening the conversation up for people to tell you, this is what I need, and when I get this, I do really great work. And then also having the conversation of when they are stuck, how do we get them unstuck, and what does it look like when someone looks stuck? How do we help them? How do we remind them to have a break, to have a drink, in really subtle ways? And the creative process
Your
itself.
son's good at that too. We're talking creative process.
That's
I was going to
right.
say, talk about flow
Yeah,
state.
yeah,
The son almost went
yeah.
all the way through to the a
Mm.
singing competition on TV recently as well. So I'd say it works at home as well as it does at the workplace.
That's right. And creativity
Yeah.
looks like frustration.
Mm.
But you've got to stay in the process and through the frustration long enough to get to the end. And a lot of people will abandon it because it's just too hard. But by dipping in and out of it and staying with it, and I'm reminded by one of the great thinkers. I think he walked for 7 years to solve a problem. We don't give up on the challenge of solving the idea, but we commit to doing things regularly to think through how to solve the idea, to get that kind of deep thinking. And I think we might be quitting some of our biggest challenges too soon because we're just not giving ourselves the right quality thinking to really work through the idea.
That's great because there are some big ones in cyber, isn't there? Yeah, like and that's sometimes we approach these projects and you can sometimes get a lot of noise around it of people taking pot shots because they're so used to the status quo or that things have always been done this way. And I think sometimes when you do think big or try and solve big things, you will get smaller people trying to attack you because you have this vision sometimes. And I know from doing a lot of startups, like even Starwood whiskey, you imagine this whiskey that's going to be something one day. And there's nothing better now than seeing it on a shelf somewhere or seeing it win, World Whiskey Awards and all those sorts of things now. But it was a thought, and that thought needs to become something. And you've got to go through that whole process of doing it. And there's so many roadblocks, like the GFC came along, and then we didn't have any funding. We had to pre-sell barrels, and you're always having to solve things. In cyber, I find there is even bigger and more vexing problems, and then we're adding AI as a layer to that. Where have you seen it work really quickly? Maybe, Ness, if you've got one that you can sort of think of front of mind in the cyber front where AI has gone and maybe cracked something that was taking you a while or something that had been really probably bubbling away in your own mind for a while. Have you got anything either for yourself or someone close to you that's sort of used AI to sort of help break through with something like that?
Yeah. So my favourite application, well, there's two. The first one is malicious code analysis. So that's a piece of work
Great one.
that can actually take anywhere between 2 hours and 2 days, depending on what it is. When you have a security-specific LLM that's trained to do that sort of thing, you can get that result much faster on what kind of malicious code it is, a full analysis, all the TTPs, all the IOCs, everything mapped to MITRE. And that's really helpful because you can immediately take action the faster you know what you're dealing with. The second one, which is my favourite, which is one of AI's superpowers, is around the ability to summarise an incident and actually pull that information in really quickly for reporting. So you can actually report, to operational teams, executive teams, more broadly, what's going on, what we've discovered. And with global organisations, if you need to translate that into different languages, you just can now. One of the organisations we were working with in a previous role, we were looking at the tech and they said, oh, well, that's all well and good, but, our head office is in Japan. I said, no problems. We'll make sure that we get all the incident reports. We'll use AI to get those delivered to you in your language at the speed of light, which is amazing. So there are a couple of areas where I think we can use it and adopt it really quickly.
So Jason and I read an RSA recently, and looking from last year's RSA to this year's RSA, AI was a big thing there, but it just it's interesting because in a lot of places there, the agents hadn't kind of get to it. They hadn't kind of turned into the quality now. Now it's all agentic, and again, it's very much changing the way cybersecurity works. And like 6 months ago, a lot of the conversation was around how it was enabling the attackers, whereas now it seems to be a force majeure for the cybersecurity companies, people doing the defense. So there was kind of and I think, Jason, you could probably talk to this a little better. There was an appearance a lot of these companies may not last. There does seem to be a consolidation, as we said, around Google and OpenAI and others that are actually kind of, even Microsoft basically building so much of this in that they're going to wipe out a lot of these other smaller companies. Where do you see the kind of next several years of this AI evolution going, and what do you think it's going to look like for cyber security companies and actually the vendors selling the products in to protect people?
Yeah, that's a big question.
We ask them on here this sometimes. It's rare, but we do it.
Yeah. Where do I see all of this going? What's interesting, at the moment, what I see a lot of in my role is really great visibility. I've got some awesome dashboards, from vulnerability management to security operations to SOAR capability, so I can see the problem. The next step is actually the automated remediation and us being bolder with automated response capabilities. And I think we've, as an industry, invested a lot in detection. We've got quite good detection engineering capabilities, but we have to be bolder with the application of laying down a response and allowing an automatic response while we do the people human in the loop cross check. And if we make a mistake, we'll just bring the person back online, right? That's particularly easy for IT systems. You probably keep it a little bit away from the OT side of things, but certainly with a lot of the things that we do, I think we could be bolder with automating response capabilities and having a look at automating some of the patch management and things like that with vulnerability scanning. I think we could be much bolder with automating some of the penetration testing to be actually always kind of aware and scanning and things like that. So some of the tools that I've seen have got that kind of capability, which is pretty exciting as well. And more broadly, some of the AI capabilities are also quite exciting. Some of the latest models we're starting to see reasoning capabilities like we've never seen before, which is kind of that step just beyond, the edge of it being predictive, but also being able to then kind of reason and have new thinking. So having people who are able to guide the AI to actually explore more of that kind of that new thinking that this data, foundational data, might actually give us.
Where do you think it's going to leave people? I know this is always a tough and thorny question, and then one of the things
I'm asked as well.
I look, and it's not a perfect example, but the invention of the loom, we saw a massive transformation from people, sewing to all of a sudden clothes shops, from owning one pair of clothes to having a whole cupboard full of them. It was a massive transformation, and people are very worried about jobs. I mean, I often say jobs are changing, but this wave of AI is just stacking up. It hasn't kind of started to even crumble. So where do you think that is going to kind of land people across the breadth and spectrum of jobs in cybersecurity?
Yeah. So I wrote an essay recently with Dan and the title was AI Quietly Everywhere, because I think what we're seeing is AI is like electricity. It is embedded in many, many applications that we're using, and we stand on the shoulders of many, many years of AI being in fraud detection and all of those kinds of systems already. So I do see AI being everywhere, and I do see that most roles in the future will have some AI in it. So I think that the challenge for all of us is to learn. The challenge of all of us to sit back and say, I did a talk recently at an organisation, and they were rolling out M365 Copilot. And I gave them the challenge. I said, don't just give AI the simple stuff. Write down some of the stuff you're really wrestling with, and actually partner with AI to kind of, with whatever AI you've got access to do the prompt engineering and to actually see how you could solve that problem using AI, or and that was kind of for some people that was like, oh really? So yeah, I like to kind of give it some of my most challenging tasks and see how it responds, and how I could use it then to inform some of kind of my decision making and thinking. So I think that's the challenge of all of us is AI probably won't replace your role, but someone who uses AI might replace you if you're not learning how to work with this new technology. It's this golden braid that will go through everything. It's the invention of the ship is also the invention of the shipwreck, but it's also the invention of us being able to go into new territories and new economies and new markets. So everything is kind of is there with this new technology. But like in all other new technologies, the more we learn about it, where it shines and where the risks are, and that we can help navigate through that, I think we're better prepared for the future.
Yeah, and that's because people still probably using it, Ness, as a bit of a search engine, right? Or just doing very basic prompting, and that's I think people who are using it, and Tom and I probably at the other end of the scale trying to probably push the limit of, well, how far can you scale? What else can you do with it, or how far can you drag this along? And unless you interact with it too, you can't. And you have some knowledge. I think you need to have some knowledge really to really push it too. So you couldn't be doing on subjects you don't have some sort of knowledge base on. I think if you do have the knowledge and you can actually push it, and what those outputs are, and there's it's a bit of a two-way street still. There is still a lot of learning that has to happen within the AI environment, right? And the better we can do that, I think, for the benefit of all, the more good you put in there and the more good stuff, I think benefits everyone. That's the way you got to think of it as well. This is not just your own little environment. You're actually feeding into a bigger model that hopefully, and especially from Cyberfront, try and put as much stuff in there that we can help to actually solve for these sorts of things. Even just something, and I can't give AI credit for it, but with the Chrome extension now with the password, if there's been a compromised password in there, the Chrome will pick that up. And these sorts of things are the advancements I'm really looking forward to, that we've had real issues with passwords in particular. I know from doing the SMB 1001, that password point is the one that gets stuck on most times in our steering committee, is what is the right way to do passwords? How often should you change them? Should you do password managers, passphrases, blah, blah, blah. If we can get those sorts of things solved, that's going to make a lot better and a lot safer for the average person, which is the people I think we really need to help as much as possible.
Yeah.
And, looking forward, you're speaking at CISO Melbourne soon. So, what do you think is going to be, AI is obviously going to be a big theme there.
No, they won't say AI.
They won't say AI at all.
Nothing, no.
What do you think is the biggest shift for, CISOs and cyber leaders to prepare for in the next 12 to 18 months? Is it really kind of diving into this and just rewinding as I kind of I'll pad this question out a bit, but I did a keynote recently, the Australian New Zealand Marketing and Communicators Conference, and I asked for a show of hands how many people are using a tool like Otter to record meetings, taking the transcript from that meeting and then in a trained AI actually using it to give you a project plan or an output or a strategy for the different team members, a social media strategy. Because for me, it's that human creativity in the beginning, so still having that human voice. The AI drafts that response up, and then you do that human edit. But all of a sudden, you're just accelerated out past everyone else. And I was really struck that almost no hands went up. And I still don't see a lot of people that, have a transcription tool follow them into meetings. And it's just a simple tool, makes things so much more effective. So what do you think CISOs specifically and cyber leaders need to be kind of looking for? And what are you going to be talking about at CISO Melbourne?
Yeah, this is my observations being in the role 100 days, right? What I expected to be working on and what I'm working on are quite different. So when I came into the role and I had a look at all the foundational capability and what's been built up and what, we've got good security operations, we've got, great advisory capability, and we've got, we're making real inroads in identity and all of those sorts of things. So we have good traditional cybersecurity capability. But the things that I've found in my role that have been really surprising is all of the emerging tech. Even deepfakes. I'm talking today at Cyber West about deepfake technology, and that's quite incredible. Why is that? Why am I looking at that? Well, because VIPs and even the chair of the organisation I look after gets caught up in deepfake scams, and as a CISO, V, how do you treat this? What are we going to do about it? How do you take it down? Because while a deep fake, personally impacts someone, it actually has the impact underneath it. There's a whole bunch of scams that kind of sit underneath that. And if the social media platforms, don't moderate for that, and some of them don't at the moment, and those scams, get accelerated, and many people get caught up in those scams. So one of the things I've been looking at is takedown services. How do we get an awareness of what's going on around our brand and our reputation and our key people, and how do I, make sure I've got takedown services to take this stuff down when it spins up, because a lot of it's very unregulated by the social media companies, right? So that's one thing that I didn't expect I'd be doing that, but that's been something I've had to really focus on. I was really surprised at the maturity of the AI program that was running inside the organisation. But then once I discovered that, it was like, how are we making sure that the data that we're putting into these models is still owned by us? How do I make sure that once we connect up some of our enterprise systems with some of these AI models, that we protect for privacy? And we have GDPR regulations we need to align for. And how do I make sure I've got real-time controls that if something looks like it's going to spill out, that it actually gets suppressed? How do I protect the actual decision-making within those systems? Because as we use more AI in the decision-making, if the underlying data gets changed or poisoned, or even if it's 0.1 or 2 degrees, then that actually upsets a whole bunch of autonomous decision-making that happens down the track. So how do I protect that data within that model has been, really interesting as well. And then there's the delightful and challenging process of supply chain. How do I really understand our supply chain? And I thought we've got some strong strategic providers, and we've done all of our due diligence and supplier surveys and all of those sorts of things. But what about the supply chain implications for AI? Who's looked into that? Nobody. and what data is going into all of those, and how many of those AI applications are holding data, storing data? Where are they storing the data? So I think the lens of privacy becomes, a really big topic as well. And then the thing that's really got my attention is also data governance across the organisation, because data is an absolute asset, but it's also a huge cost to organisations if we don't have the right, data retention policies and backup policies and all of those sorts of things. We might be holding a lot of data that's actually not valuable to the organisation. So it's actually having a look at where's the valuable data, how long should we be holding it, and if we've got data that's not valuable that we've had for 10, 20 years, let's make sure we get labelling on that data, and let's consider deleting it and archiving it. I guess my number one priority, with all of the things going on in the emerging threats, is around resilience and recovery. So we'll be doing some executive simulations with our executive team and board, having a close look at our incident response plan, making sure that's up to date, and making sure that we're actually testing new parts of our business that we might not have tested before. Some of our parts of our business that might be doing R&D, some of the parts of the business that might have, some of our strongest IP and things like that. And then the other really big thing that I've discovered, which I didn't expect to see, is the importance of insider risk management. And actually, with all of the changes that happen, making sure that we have the right processes to protect the IP and the data that sits in the organisation. Yeah.
Well, look, despite ripping off the Pandora's box, we could go on forever. I think we'll wrap it up here. So thank you so much, Vannessa. It's been fantastic chatting. Listeners, you can find Vannessa on LinkedIn. And I think also you're in a very privileged space being with an organisation that has got an appetite for risk and with AI and is actually out there kind of experimenting on the cutting edge. So thank you so much for joining us, Vannessa. And thank you, Jason, for joining us as always.
Super. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Tom.